From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you, and here's what's coming up. K-State's Dorivar Ruiz-Diaz and Jenny Ifft will talk about new crop insurance add-on coverage of post-planting nitrogen applications to dryland corn. This will be available on a pilot basis in 10 northeast Kansas counties this year, saying that it may be the first of several targeted crop insurance endorsements for specific production practices. Then from the Washburn University School of Law, Roger McEowen will discuss a number of things to consider before purchasing farm or ranch land. He's urging you potential buyers to do your homework on the status of that property. And K-State's Gus van Der Hoeven stands by with another Stop, Look, and Listen. All that here on Agriculture Today. Thanks for tuning in. You're listening to Agriculture Today. It's always good to have you aboard. And for starters, on this edition, we're going to tell you more about a project that will get going in northeast Kansas quite soon, of interest directly to corn growers, but it may open the door to other aspects of crop insurance coverage, as we come to find. Across the way now, from the Agricultural Economics Department at K-State, Risk Management Specialist, K-State Research and Extension, Jenny Ifft, and Crop Nutrient Specialist with K-State Research and Extension, Dorivar Ruiz-Diaz. And what this is a crop insurance endorsement attached to nitrogen applications for corn. And what we're looking at here, Dorivar, to talk agronomically here, is a common practice of applying nitrogen post-planting, in this case to dryland corn, right?
Yes, Eric, and as we know, this is a practice that can contribute significantly to improve nitrogen use efficiency. And of course, with the fertilizer prices, we're looking for ways to improve that efficiency and take advantage of every pound of nitrogen. And again, split application is one of those tools that we have available. We know that corn usually will take very little nitrogen until we get probably to about V6 to V8 leaf stage. At that point, it's really when the uptake of nitrogen is increased significantly. So that basically gives us a lot of flexibility on what to do before planting, either fall apply or spring or even starter applications. And especially, again, thinking about that citrus application, we can do applications at that time around that V6 growth stage, again, providing many benefits agronomically. However, one of the challenges has been that, that's also the time of the year where we have more of the, heavy rainfall in eastern parts of the state. And obviously the risk of not being able to apply that nitrogen is always a concern. So I'm very excited about these type of programs that perhaps open that opportunity to take advantage of this very efficient way to put nitrogen, improve efficiency, and at the same time minimizing the risks associated with split application of nitrogen.
And just to stress again the importance of that application timing. It makes all the difference in hitting the appropriate growth stage to get the fullest efficiency out of that end.
Absolutely, Eric. And a lot of this also depends on what we've done in terms of pre-planned applications. In many cases, producers may be putting significant amounts already in the fall or spring. In that case, we do have a little bit more flexibility because we do have some level of nitrogen that we can apply that nitrogen perhaps a little bit later. But if we are limited in terms of the amount of nitrogen applied pre-planned, then obviously we're relying very heavily on that in-season application. And so timing becomes more critical in that kind of situation.
As we know, Mother Nature sometimes, as you said, Dorivar, does not cooperate. Hence this inspiration on this new crop insurance endorsement, what it's called, Jenny, applying to the situation where a producer is prevented from putting that split application on in a timely fashion. Talk about the product itself, if you would.
Right. So with this product, PACE, Post-Application Coverage Endorsement, you have to already have crop insurance. Most corn producers do, so a yield protection or revenue protection policy. And then if you do that, you can have this as an add-on. So how that works is you're going to pay a little bit of extra premium. And if you're prevented from post-applying nitrogen from side dressing within a specific window, you can get a payment or an indemnity. It's a little bit different than some other crop insurance products. So you have to show receipts. You have to show that you were prevented from post-applying, and then you get your indemnity. And your indemnity is tied to the level of coverage you select. And you can look at that schedule when you're selecting. So you have a specific premium. If you can't post-apply, you get a specific payment. So it's a little bit different than some other crop insurance products.
Need to pass along before we go any further. This is not available broadly to all growers in Kansas. This is being tested out on a pilot basis in a specific part of the state.
Right. So it is only in 10 counties in northeast Kansas. So you could think Marshall County is included, Riley County is included, and everything to the east of those counties, 10 counties. But it might still be worth listening, even if you're not a dryland corn producer in one of those counties. This is a pilot. If it goes well, it could be expanded throughout the state. It could be available nationally everywhere. The other point, even if this specific policy doesn't apply to a producer's specific situation, generally there is a broad coalition or collaboration out there to support these kind of endorsements, these kind of crop insurance add-ons. This specific policy, you had groups like National Corn Growers, you had environmental groups that are behind it, that are promoting it. The basic idea is if there's specific conservation or production practices that influence risk, yield risk, that crop insurance should take this into account. So we could see more endorsements like this coming out in the future.
To make it work, though, it's going to require producers to have a pretty sound record of what's going on with their applications and the things that interfered with timely applications.
Right. With most crop insurance claims, you do have to have records or documentation. I like to say any documentation that's required by crop insurance is also the kind of record keeping you should be doing for good management practices. So you want to keep your receipts and invoices to make sure you can document what happened and your costs.
You mentioned that a producer has the alternative of choosing various coverages then?
Right.
What's the latitude there that they have to work with?
So the specific coverage levels are 75 to 90%. That basically gives you a schedule. So if you pick a lower coverage level, you have a lower premium and a lower payout. You have a higher coverage level, you're going to have a higher premium and a higher payout. And you get the payout if you can't post-apply. So it's really just you pay the premium and you get the indemnity, the full indemnity, if you can't get in the field. So it's a little bit simpler, and it's also going to vary based on how important post-application is. And you're going to have to, when you get this policy, you're going to have to say, I apply this much before planning and this much after planning. And so your costs and your payouts are going to be affected by how reliant you are on those post-planning applications. The premium you pay, it can vary. I pulled some numbers, anything from $1 to $10 per acre. So if you choose the lowest coverage and you have a very small post-application use, you could end up paying $1 per acre versus having very heavy post-application and a high coverage level. But if you think about the premiums, one example I pulled, if you're post-applying 60% of your nitrogen, so you apply 40% before planting, 60% after, the 75% premium would be $3 per acre. And if you're prevented from applying, you would get a payout of $77 per acre. So if you think about it in terms of the value of the premium relative to the indemnity at this level, you'd have to have a claim in about 1 in 20 years to get your premium back.
This is workable, it sounds.
It should benefit producers that face this kind of risk.
If one is, in fact, prevented from applying in a timely way, do they file right away for that claim, or do they wait until after the growing season and the subsequent yields resulting?
Nope, they're not going to measure yields.
Okay.
They're only going to look at whether you were prevented. There's a specific window. So it varies depending on when you plant. With any crop insurance, you have to plant by a certain date. So depending on when you plant, there's going to be a window for post-application. And so anywhere from early April to late May through June. It varies a little bit by county, but that's the general window. There's going to be a specific window. If you can't get in the field in that window, you need to file a claim within 72 hours after the deadline. So this is a situation where you need to be communicating with your crop insurance agent about deadlines and be aware of that. I would say usually when there's a lot of prevented planting, that's something that's on people's minds. So if you're in that situation, you need to be extra careful of the dates and make sure you get that claim in time.
Dorivar, from the agronomic point of view, as you look at this policy and its degree of helpfulness to producers, it's going to allow one to maybe not push the envelope so much in as far as putting that side dress end down when conditions are not optimum, isn't it?
That's another excellent point, Eric, because we do have also situations where we are pushing the application when soil conditions are not right, and obviously we are creating all kinds of problems with that type of situation, compaction, and issues like that. And so obviously we want to avoid that and create long-term damage by pushing the application. A lot of that depends obviously on the type of application system. We do have flexibility. Many farmers are still using hydros for side dressing, but UAN and urea are obviously very, very common options for side dressing nitrogen. One aspect that Jenny mentioned that I really like about this program in general, and just a split application of nitrogen, is that we do get the agronomic, the yield benefit, but obviously we also get the environmental benefit by minimizing any potential nitrogen loss. So it's really a win-win situation, in my opinion. And I think we're going to be looking at these counties that are potentially counties that we can have these type of issues with the wetter spring months and that time of application. But we also have other counties in the state that can benefit from these type of programs. So we'll see how these develop in the future.
Yeah. Well, very interested to see how this pilot tryout of this new fertilizer application insurance coverage. And by the way, in this week's Agronomy E-Update newsletter out of K-State, there will be an article on all of this. Producers, check that out at agronomy.ksu.edu. Dorivar, Jenny, thank you for passing all of this along.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you.
Risk Management Specialist Jenny Ifft and Crop Nutrient Specialist Dorivar Ruiz-Diaz, both of K-State Research and Extension. You're listening to Agriculture Today. Agriculture Today continues now. Once again, we touch base with Roger McEowen, Professor of Agricultural Law and Taxation, Washburn University School of Law. He's along with us every other week to get into different angles on agricultural law and taxation issues. This one that we take up today, you have a very nice article on it, by the way, Roger, in your blog series, What to Consider Before Buying Farmland or Ranch Land. And we know how pricey and how lucrative the land market is right now, so any decisions that producers make along this line have to be thought out with considerable scrutiny, don't they?
They sure do. There are a lot of considerations, not just economic considerations, but legal problems that can arise in the future that aren't necessarily revealed at the time you're negotiating that purchase price or even looking at a tract of land. And I want to try to highlight a few things that we may not necessarily be thinking of, and then cover, of course, some of those more obvious ones, but just as a way of reminder.
Let's go into what you've listed in the article here, starting with any environmental issues that might be attached to a parcel of land. And this can manifest itself several ways, you say.
That's right. There are a couple of these that we don't really think of very much. And one of those is the Endangered Species Act. If you end up buying a tract that then has a habitat designation on it or on a part of the land for an endangered or listed species of wildlife or plants, then it can severely restrict your farming use of that property and other activities on your property, and you're not going to have full use of that, which you may have paid the purchase price for, anticipating that you would have full use. Now, this is an issue in some states more than others. I would say Florida, Texas, Tennessee, California. Those, when you look at the list of endangered species and plants, those states have more listings than other states do. And Kansas has a couple, but it's not that big of an issue. I think we had an issue a number of years ago with the Topeka Shiner. That was primarily in a river. But some of these other states, boy, if you get a habitat designation, it can really restrict your land use activities. And a lot of these designations end up on private land. So that's an issue. That information is out there where these designations are at and the listing of the species. So what I'm suggesting here is just take a look at that. If you're in an area where that might be a concern, again, not that big of an issue for us in the center part of the country.
You have to check that out in advance. Also, check out, you say, whatever hazardous waste conditions might exist, if you will, on a piece of land. And this ties back to what's known in abbreviated fashion as the CERCLA Act. What might one want to think about here?
Yeah, CERCLA is also commonly known as the Superfund Law. I think people probably recognize that. The old Love Canal and Valley of the Drums issues from back in the 60s and 70s gave rise to that act. But the point here is this is legislation that's designed to deal with hazardous waste. We tend not to think about that with respect to farm and ranch land, but you can still find a number of farms and ranches where there's an old dump site. Mm-hmm. It may have been buried, covered over, but it might be there in a ravine where kitchen appliances get dumped, tractor tires are placed, those types of things. And actually, there are a lot of hazardous chemicals that are used on farms and ranches. We think of pesticides and fuel and all those types of things. If they're not disposed of properly, it can create a problem for you. So what you want to do on this is complete a due diligence form, and some states require it by statute, that requires the seller to disclose whether they know of any substances like that exist on the property during their period of ownership, or what they've used, whether they've used those substances on their property and how they've disposed of them. That's a really good form to complete. Again, some of those, for example, in Indiana, has a statutory form that a seller has to complete for a disclosure statement. But also take some common sense steps. Make an inquiry about the property. Do a title search. What type of operations were conducted on the property? If you walk the property, are there areas where grass is not growing and just simply does not grow? That could be a tip-off that there have been substances there, hazardous substances, that has killed the vegetation off. You want to look for those things and ask questions. So do your due diligence to become what's known as an innocent purchaser, and that can be a solid defense.
Another thing that falls under the environmental issues heading would be any designation of a wetlands on a property. Let's step to that for a moment here, and we could tie into that something that's still a very, very hot topic, the Waters of the United States regulations.
Yeah, actually there are two aspects for farmers and ranchers when we talk about wetlands, and particularly for farmers, and in the center part of the country primarily, we have the USDA program known as Swamp Buster, where you can't break out land and put it into production when it was previously not in production because it was a wet area. So draining the property to make it productive can trip some rules under the Swamp Buster rules, which came in 1985 under the Farm Bill that year. You got to be careful with respect to that. So what you want to look for is the presence of what's known as hydrophytic vegetation, swampy areas, wet areas, the type of plants that thrive in those areas, and then ask and check FSA records to see if there's been a wetland designation on it for Swamp Buster purposes, because that can affect your receipt of federal farm program payments. Now, the other aspect of it, as you indicated, is a wetland that could be tied to a water of the United States, and now the federal government's got jurisdiction over your property and your land use activities. So not only can you be restricted on your farming activities by a Swamp Buster wetland designation, you can get into the need for a federal permit to use certain parts of your property if it's deemed to be tied to a water of the United States. So you got two issues there you have to deal with. Now, again, we're talking the minority situations, but these are things that we always have to be aware of when we're buying land. We want to make sure that we're free and clear of these things.
Well, beyond the environmental-oriented issues that might be out there, there are other things that you would propose potential land buyers look into more closely, and one of those would be any existing leases on that land prior.
That's right, and one of the common misconceptions amongst a lot of people, including sellers, including auctioneers, including real estate brokers, is that an existing oral farm lease terminates when the land changes hands. That's not correct. That lease continues into the hands of the buyer until statutory notice of termination is given. So unless it's been terminated, an oral lease, then it continues on. And not only do you have that obligation to terminate the lease if you want to as the new owner, you have to determine who actually is the tenant. I've seen situations where the landowner didn't know all of the tenants that were claiming to be tenants, and therefore the allegation was they didn't properly give notice to terminate the lease because there was this undisclosed tenant in a nursing home that was picking off some of the government payments, and that's the only reason they were listed as a tenant. we can get into situations like that. So ask questions, check records, get a signed statement from the seller, just getting the seller to state what they know, those types of things. Talk to neighbors. In rural communities, neighbors know lots of things, and we always find good information from neighbors about other people, and that can be very helpful. So know who the surface tenant is, and in Kansas, we often have subsurface tenants, those mineral leases. What are the terms of the mineral lease? What rights are you acquiring when you buy a farm? Very, very important stuff with respect to leases.
You mentioned striking up a conversation with potential neighbors before you purchase a piece of land. That could apply, too, with anything else that might be going on locally. With respect to development plans, perhaps a wind farm is in the offing in that location. You'd want to know about that before you purchased?
Yeah, a wind farm, a solar farm, plans by the county to expand a road that might take some of your road frontage that's tillable away from you, those types of things. And often you can check public records, county commissioner meeting minutes, newspaper articles, again, talking to neighbors, what's the buzz in the community about what developers might be doing, or have they been coming through wildcatting, so to speak, and trying to sign people up for leases? Is this tract that you're looking at, or tracts, are they prime targets for that type of development? And again, check with the county, as I said, to see if there are plans to take some of the land to expand a roadway that might affect your property. I've had that happen personally one time, looking at a house a number of years ago, and the realtor, to her credit, told my wife and I, I'm not sure you want to buy this house because in the works are the expansion of this road from 2-lane to 4-lane is going to really take a big chunk of this property out. I was like, oh, thank you very much. We'll go look elsewhere. Well, sure enough, that's what happened a few years later. So those types of things and doing that type of examination and questioning of people and getting that information is absolutely critical.
And one last thing here, literally knowing the lay of the land by inspecting that property seems basic, but it's fairly essential here, isn't it?
Yeah, boots on the ground. You can't beat that. Walk the property, look at things, check fences, see what type of shape they're in, see what type of weeds there are. Are there weed problems? Are there noxious weed issues? Again, looking for areas where grass doesn't grow. Nothing beats a physical inspection. Get out there and walk the property.
Again, we've not touched upon everything that Roger has included in this very good article. We would advise you to take a look at it. What to consider before buying farmland, it's in his blog series at washburnlaw.edu/WALTR. It was posted this past Friday, February the 11th. A very good read. Roger, thanks. In 2 weeks, we'll talk again.
Thank you, Eric.
From the Washburn University School of Law, Roger McEowen there. We'll be back on Agriculture Today. This is Agriculture Today. Stop, look, and listen.
Cows could graze it and do the walking.
That's Gus van Der Hoeven of Kansas State University with comment on life in rural Kansas.
I'm not an economist, and I surely am not an agriculture economist, but I do grow hay. Not even that much, but roughly 80 acres of good bottomland is devoted to growing brome hay. Then we have 35 acres of native prairie hay. Those 35 acres I love. They have never been plowed except for 3 acres, which were plowed many, many years ago when the policy was plow all you can, from fence to fence. It was a bad policy. Slowly, those 3 acres are coming back to native grass, and we do cut them now for hay. There is some return, as I count the big round bales after harvest and grin. However, the 80 acres of brome grass for hay and or grazing are on my mind. Many years ago, when I made a decision to go to brome and get away from growing wheat or beans, I needed to simplify the operation and had a clear picture in my mind. The good bottomland and the 230-plus acres of rangeland could work together if I would concentrate on grazing and growing grass, some for hay. In my mind, I combined cool season grass, the brome, with native warm season, the range. Cows could graze it and do the walking. Of course, what I had to keep in mind was the fact that I worked with renters who used my land to farm. So we talked things over and planned together, keeping in mind that I owned the farm, the land. However, I realized their needs. The other factor which influenced my thinking was the land and the soil quality. I wanted to improve the soil. The bottomland has been farmed a long time. When I bought the farm, there was Milo, year after year, grown in those fields. The last year with no or little fertilizer. There always is that fertilizer. I looked on the computer and it tells you clearly, fertilizer is expensive. But farmers need it to grow crops, corn, wheat. The soybeans can do with a little less. It's a legume, but phosphorus helps. This year we did not put any phosphorus on our brome. It would have cost another $14 per acre, the little we do put on. The nitrogen will cost us $90 or more per acre. That is on the brome grass for hay. If we grew corn, it would be a lot more. Farming is not cheap, and as President Jefferson said, each man should have and manage a plot of land so that they know where food comes from and what it takes to grow food. Going to the supermarket and buying food does not tell the story. As the fertilizer cost and fuel to run equipment have gone up over the years, I have been thinking. I'm looking for a legume to overseed the brome with, a legume which is compatible, has staying power, and suits our climate and soil. I also need a gentle rain. I'm short of moisture. As my friend used to say, it is what it is, and we have to learn to live with it and think.
Gus van Der Hoeven of Kansas State University with his weekly commentary on life in rural Kansas. And our time's away once more. Thanks to you for tuning in. Eric Atkinson for Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.